Welcome to Warning Shot with Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and Andy Zemenides, Executive Director of the American Hellenic Council.
CBS News has learned that Russian troops have been given orders to invade the country.
Welcome back to Warning Shot. Endy Zemenides with Joel Rubin. And man, Joel, what a weekend. The All-Star game, we don't see much defense at the All-Star game, but I think we saw a lot of defense in international politics. All right. Amazingly, another weekend without an invasion, even though everybody was, people were saying they circled that date. An invasion is happening on Sunday. Didn't happen. Munich Security Conference.
Yes.
Something that people didn't pay attention to, and maybe we can get into a little deeper. The Olympics in China ending, and China being kind of a big winner over the last 2 weeks. And announcements of major diplomatic initiatives, including a Blinken-Lavrov meeting, a potential summit. Where are we on Ukraine?
Well, look, man, you just said it right on. I mean, it was fascinating. This Munich Security Conference, which kind of became staid and boring over the last few years, and basically a bunch of older European leaders getting together and talking about the good old days, and not anymore. Now it's front and center, and it was the scene of the action. Munich, we have to remember, was also the place where a great appeasement occurred many decades ago that ended up leading into World War II. So there's a lot of historic irony there, but we had all these leaders together, and this was a rallying moment, and the first time of real relevance for this summit. We had 40 or so members of Congress, both chambers, both sides of the aisle. We had the vice president out there. We had the Secretary of State, and we had President Zelensky of Ukraine flying out, despite being warned it would be dangerous, and throwing bombs at the audience about how they had failed Ukraine. They need to do more, and he wants their support. He appreciates their support, but it's not good enough yet. And really sort of demonstrating the crisis urgency of the moment. And I think, frankly, Kamala Harris as well gave a speech to end all speeches, that she gave a speech that probably was the single most significant speech by an American leader in a global forum to prevent a war since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
And here's some of what Vice President Harris had to say.
In Ukraine, let us remember, from the wreckage of 2 world wars, a consensus emerged in Europe and the United States. A consensus in favor of order, not chaos. Security, not conflict. So by forging relationships and bonds, forging organizations and institutions, laws and treaties, we together established a set of rules, norms that have governed ever since. And Europe has enjoyed unprecedented peace, security, and prosperity through a commitment to a set of defining principles.
So, Joel, sticking with Munich, a couple of years ago, before he was elected, Joe Biden was in Munich, promised America will be back. Is this Harris speech and the whole American presence at Munich this year a firm indicator for you that America is back?
Absolutely. And what this speech did was it put an exclamation point on the idea that American leadership is essential to galvanizing the Western countries, Europe and our allies, to protect the peace. And this is something that we haven't seen a lot of, frankly, from American leaders over the years. A speech that really personified leadership on a core security crisis. We had the opposite about 20 years ago when Colin Powell went to the UN and essentially called for war. Here we have a leader going to Munich and organizing to oppose a war. And we haven't seen this since 1962, quite frankly. And I believe that because that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was another moment of Russian disinformation, a moment of Russia being aggressive and trying to put nukes 90 miles from our country. And we went to the UN through Adlai Stevenson and called them out and undermined their disinformation and told the world in full public view that Russia is lying. And that kind of tone disinfected the debate. There was a deal. There were off-ramps, diplomatic off-ramps that were negotiated that enabled that to calm down. And that was a major diplomatic win for the United States. And it shows the power of a speech and the power of public disinfectant. I also think there was something really important and powerful for me to watch Kamala Harris there, representing the United States as a Black woman, a woman of color, a woman of heritage whose parents are African-American and Indian American, and to be there representing us right now, the true face of America and all of its beautiful diversity, to me was a very empowering moment. And it was something that's a long time in coming. And I actually tweeted about this, and the hate and misogyny towards Harris was right there on my Twitter feed. A lot of people disliking the idea that she represented us. But you know what? For the Europeans to see this, I think they see the truest sense of America right now in the world, and this bigger fight that we're fighting, which is about our diverse democracy and trying to ensure that it is one that does keep the peace both at home and abroad. And also one more thing that really personally matters to me is that, you know, as an American Jew, my family came from that place about 120 years ago, fled what was known as the Pale of the Settlement, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, that sort of space, and left because of pogroms. And so my people are here because of fighting over there. And to have a person from my country, my adopted country, of course, I'm now 5th generation American, but to go back there and say, we want to keep the peace, that's really powerful. And so to me, it was a really significant major moment, not just pure technical military moment.
So the symbolism, but going to the pure technical military, the symbolism, the political message was powerful. But did it work? You know, it's there. You referred to the Ukrainian president, and he was out after Vice President Harris's speech, calling for sanctions. He had to be rebutted by Secretary Blinken yesterday on the Sunday talk show, saying, well, sanctions are a deterrent. We can't use sanctions now and then have nothing in our toolbox, in our foreign policy toolbox. Is this Ukraine? You saw this with the Obama administration coming in at the end of the Bush administration, Georgia trying, the Republic of Georgia trying to get the U.S. drawn into a conflict with Russia in the Caucasus. Yep. Now, is this Ukraine trying to up the ante, do sanctions now, so later you only have to do troops? And if that's Ukraine's strategy, did Vice President Harris's speech go for naught?
Well, I think that it's understandable why the Ukrainian leader would say, do something now, do something now. There's a hot war in our east.
Oh, we are doing something. Are we arming them?
Well, we are arming them. Exactly. And that's the point. And I think, and you framed it just right. Like, look, these sanctions and the sanctions that the Biden team is talking about, and that Kamala Harris was out there in Munich organizing, and much of her mission was to keep the allies on board behind the scenes with the sanctions package. Much of what the United States is doing is sending troop reinforcements to Poland, cajoling Germany, meeting with the French, all to keep this diverse, cantankerous European coalition together, so that they will, on day one, turn on the sanctions sledgehammer if Putin fully does invade again. And so that was Harris's diplomatic mission. And that in that case, it worked. It didn't work to what Zelensky said, which is do sanctions now. But there's a reason why we're not doing sanctions now, which is that, first of all, if we did it, Russia could credibly say we started the war. Russia could say that the United States just bombed me with sanctions and I hadn't invaded. Where's the justification in that? Second, it would undermine our unity. We would not get the Europeans to agree to do a massive sanctions bomb on Russia without a Russian invasion. That's just not tenable. And so I think that it
And
works.
you know what, Joel? This is something that people got to appreciate. That for sanctions to work against Russia, we do have to have Europe on board. This is, we can't say, yeah, we're going to do sanctions and everybody's jumping on board. There are European countries that after Crimea made the sacrifice to their own economies, right, by sticking with Western sanctions in the middle of an energy crisis in Europe, record high energy prices. We're still in winter in Europe. I think we underestimate how important and what a big victory is keeping this coalition together, including a brand new government in Germany, a brand new government, which there's reason to question their resolve, committed to implementing sanctions. Now, let's lay them out. Let the Russians know how bad they can be if they keep moving forward.
Yeah, the German role in this, basically Europe is highly suspicious across the board of Germany's ability to stand tough with Russia. A former leader of Germany is now Vladimir Putin's lobbyist, Gerhard Schroeder, and he is in the same political party as the current chancellor. And so for Germany to be taking the step of basically endorsing, and this is much of what Harris did out there, endorsing the idea of putting a halt to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which would carry about 40, tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's like 40% of the gas to Germany. That's not a small initiative by Germany. That's a major harm and impact to their economy. So we can't just say, oh, tomorrow we're going to tell them to cut Nord Stream 2, even if Russia doesn't invade. That's Ted Cruz tactics. That's our right-wing tactics here in the United States that want to just bludgeon and undermine Joe Biden at this moment. But diplomacy requires nimbleness, and it also requires vision. And the vision is to have a sanctions package that makes it clear to Vladimir Putin that there will be major penalties. That would be undermined if he invades further. That would be undermined if it's done first. And I think that Harris delivered that message. The unity matters. It's not just optics. It's actually for practical, hard-hitting measures. But also as an American, I'm very proud to see our leaders out there in their full diversity, going out to Europe and organizing and representing us. And I think that a lot of Americans have a lot of pride in seeing the first female elected vice president, first one on national ticket, a woman of color, to go out and speak truth and be powerful and be effective in that venue. That is a major achievement for us as a country.
So beyond the Munich Security Conference and the speeches and the power of symbols, we have a couple major diplomatic initiatives coming. First, Secretary Blinken has invited, and Foreign Minister Lavrov has accepted a meeting this Thursday, which purportedly, among other things, this meeting will set out the details for a summit between President Biden and President Putin that seems to have been arranged by President Macron of France. There's a lot of moving parts here.
A lot of presidents in there.
A lot of presidents here. And again, you were in an administration where there were a lot of these back channel communications. There was the reset. There was that famous hot mic moment of President Obama talking to President Medvedev about, hey, let me get through this election and
tell Vladimir.
Vladimir we're okay. But what do you expect? What do you think is going to happen Thursday? How likely is a presidential level summit? And is this maybe what Russia is looking for?
Boy, look, Vladimir Putin, if there's one thing he knows, it's how to make himself the center of attention. Who does he remind me of in our politics? I'm trying to think. Some bloviator from Florida. Look, Vladimir Putin has orchestrated a situation where everybody's coming to him, right? And that's okay. I think
literally they're all flying to Russia.
All flying to be at a table that's about 40 feet long, made of marble, so they can't hear each other for diplomacy. You know, nobody understands what he benefits from by invading Ukraine full on, because he doesn't really, and Russia doesn't really benefit from that. So is he making a play for something else? Is there some intermediate step? Is it the ego growth? Is it the fact that he continues to try to reestablish his spheres of influence? I think that, frankly, from the American perspective, the idea that we can engage on diplomacy to prevent a full-on assault, that's the objective here. For Vladimir Putin, though, there are other objectives. And tell me a little bit about your thoughts on what some of those objectives could look like.
Well, first of all, just the fact that this meeting may be called a summit, right? That raises this invokes memories of presidential summits during the Cold War. I think that's what Russia wants. It's not only Russia. We talked about this a little bit last week. It's Russia. It's China. They want to remake the world order. They see the US and the West at a particular low point, and leaders like Putin, like Xi Jinping, like Erdogan and others, they're at the age that they know they have this moment in time to get to the table and change things the way they want to change them. The fact that this is called a summit is important. It's insider baseball a little bit. The fact that, the French leaders getting involved.
Yeah.
There's something going on here. Russia has been clear about this. And in fact, last week, President Biden was clear about this too. This is this is something bigger than Russia, Ukraine. Right? Russia is saying we want a new security arrangement in Europe. And that's what they're looking for out of this summit. They want to define this summit. We're here in the US saying this is a summit to de-escalate the crisis in Ukraine. I'm sure the Russians are saying this is a summit to decide the future security arrangement in Europe.
Yeah, and for Vladimir Putin, his roots are as a KGB officer. John McCain had this great line. I looked into his eyes and all I saw were KGB. And so George W. Bush looked into his eyes and saw his soul. Misread it, unfortunately. So we are watching a guy who misses the KGB, misses the Soviet Union, misses the.
Remember his famous quote: "The biggest geopolitical catastrophe was the crumbling of the Soviet Union." I don't think enough people are remembering that quote.
He wants that back. And what threatens him? NATO, in many ways, threatens him. Security arrangements between the United States and our democratic allies. Democracy threatens him. Ukraine as a democracy threatens him. Why did he and has he been consistently trying to undermine Ukraine's current government? Why? Because it's a democracy. It is autonomous. It makes up its own decisions. He wants to try to boss it around and tell it, you can't join NATO. That is to Putin the anathema to his worldview. And so I think for this moment, we have to deal with the reality that he consistently wants more security benefits and gains. He has to know that invading Ukraine will undermine that invading Ukraine full on will create massive economic pain at home, a potential insurgency of a country with over 40 million people. Remember, we invaded Iraq. It had at the time about 25 million people. We had about 150 to 200,000 troops. He's got 150 to 200,000 troops along the border, and they've got 40 million people and a very organized army compared to anything in recent history. It's bloody. It will be bloody. So he has to calculate that could harm his security at some level. So all that, maybe he's suing for something else. Maybe he's looking for a different.
I think the conversation has been too much about NATO. I don't think NATO is what he's ultimately trying to prevent. I think he's trying to prevent the EU from expanding its borders. NATO, this debate reminds me a little bit of the people who argue against tort reform, and they always talk about doctors who get sued. But if you look at what they put forward as tort reform, they're trying to prevent chemical companies from getting sued or mass torts. NATO is an easy talking point for Putin, because he says, why are you expanding a military alliance? But if we look at all the other things that we don't talk about, for example, a decade ago, Armenia, let's just take Ukraine, for example.
Yeah.
The Ukraine crisis with Russia started when they were trying to sign an EU association agreement, not NATO negotiation, right? When Armenia wanted to sign an EU association agreement, Putin said, I'm going to cut off the gas. And the EU officials had gone to Armenia, and behind the curtain comes out Vladimir Putin. Our goal has been, starting with NATO and American political and diplomatic and military support for a united Europe, is a Europe united and at peace. That's whole, right. Free, and at peace. Right. That does not benefit Vladimir Putin. I think he loves seeing problems within the EU, and he'll use the NATO the NATO canard. I think it's a red canard, to prevent the expansion of a whole democratic, free Europe.
And so that means there is some space for diplomatic off-ramps. That, to me, is what it sounds like. But understanding that this kind of strain, this kind of Cold War 2.0, is not going away anytime soon.
Exactly. This is a chess game. I mean, not trying to do a pun because it's Russian.
I only play checkers. I don't know how to play chess.
I'm a backgammon guy, the national game of Greece. But this is a chess game, but we got to be careful not to think of it that it's a one-dimensional chess game. We hear 3D, three-dimensional chess. It's clear that that's how Putin plays. Even Garry Kasparov, listen to this tweet from today. If the world lets this go forward, I hope they have a list of the next pieces of the map they are willing to concede to Putin's use of force, because he does have such a list, and facing no opposition, he will continue to work down it. And that's true. And it doesn't mean that he wants all of Ukraine. In fact, I'm not sure he does. I think he has. We saw last week his parliament put up a resolution to recognize the already occupied, the separatist regions of Donbass as an independent country. I can see him saying, hey, we got that success. We protected Russians there. They're an independent country. Maybe that new independent country cuts a treaty with Russia. Russia puts a permanent base. So now, instead of separatists and rebels and little men in unidentified uniforms, now you formally have Russian troops there. He can say, you've accepted it elsewhere, and then claim a victory and basically eviscerate Ukraine as we know it today, and force the world to accept this sovereignty and work down his list slowly, the way Kasparov anticipates. In fact, this is not so going down to this three-dimensional chess game that he's playing. This shouldn't be only about preventing a hot war. Putin is very capable, willing, and probably has a plan for, as you said, Cold War 2.0.
Yeah, it's really chilling, to keep on with the Cold War analogy, right? It's a very chilling moment, because what we're looking at is essentially a dictator with nuclear weapons and massive energy resources who has no hesitation to sacrifice the lives of Russian soldiers in order to advance a neo-imperialist vision for the region near his country. And that's just highly reckless, and that's highly destabilizing, and it's also something we don't control. And I think that means that, like Kasparov says, he has a list, and we got to pay attention to that list. And so there are diplomatic off-ramps for this moment in time, this crisis. There are several, and I'll touch on them real quick, but I think the diplomatic off-ramps for the moment can't be done in isolation, to your point. We can't just say, okay, let's make a deal to move out of this crisis and not think about 3 steps ahead and where Putin is heading, because if we do, in many ways, we're falling into his trap. And I think the Biden team gets that. I know they get that. That's why they're putting a firm line now. That's why they've worked to unify our allies now. That's why they're rhetorically undermining Putin now, isolating him now, because they get that this is a longer game than just the next week, 2 or 3. And when it comes to diplomatic off-ramp, so for this week, there are a few variables on the table. There's like the multilateral approach, which we can look at through the Minsk process. And the Minsk process it is born out of the 2014 period and a discussion where Russia and Ukraine, France, Germany, the United States, they have a sort of a platform for engaging on how to resolve the fighting in the East. Could that be a place? Well, Russia is claiming Ukraine is violating Minsk and using that as a pretext for invading further. Not sure if that's broken or not, but certainly the Ukrainians don't feel that Russia has lived up to its side of the bargain. The OSCE as well, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, is part of that. There's another off-ramp, a second, NATO, the question of could there be dialogue, Russia-NATO? There was earlier in January. Russia-NATO summit didn't generate much in terms of results, but, you know, Russia, regardless, does not want NATO encroaching on its territory. Too bad. Those are sovereign countries. Poland, Romania, these countries, they have the right to determine their security. And they look at Russia and they say, my God, they're threatening Ukraine. We need NATO. So again, we've talked about this, but Russia and Putin, paradoxically, is strengthening NATO and the eastern flanks countries' desire to be part of it rather than weakening it. So this is what happens when you have brutes running countries. The third, and maybe this is perhaps the most viable off-ramp, is this bilateral dialogue, this U.S.-Russia summit. What can be on the table? Strategic stability, meaning nukes. I know I've said it before, but 90% of the world's nuclear weapons are in the hands of the United States and Russia. So that's a significant issue. There are other ones related to force posture and where is the United States placing our support? How are we putting missile defense batteries, for example, in Europe, and where are they going? What are things that essentially Vladimir Putin uses to argue that he's being encroached upon militarily and use that to justify how he has to push back, which resonates in many quarters here in Washington as well. There is a constituency that says, oh, the United States is too aggressive in those areas. Even if the countries ask for that military support, we need to back off. But those are some of the lanes.
And that's why we have to look at the whole picture. I don't think even we have to look at the whole picture. This is what I want our viewers and our listeners to think about. We introduced a concept last week of spheres of influence, and people who may not care about NATO going all the way to the borders of Ukraine or being in Ukraine, you may care about who runs, for example, the second biggest Christian church on earth, the Orthodox Church. And something that people don't understand is that the Russian Orthodox Church is waging a civil war within the Orthodox Church to take primacy away from the ecumenical patriarch, who has been pro-American and pro-liberal world order, pro-environment, has visited with Secretary Pompeo and just now was in Washington visiting with President Biden. We should look at how they're expanding Orthodox nationalism. We should look at how they're using gas to maybe affect how a member of NATO, Bulgaria, stays united with NATO, or that they're selling Russian weapons to Turkey. Think about Turkey's role. Turkey bought S-400s, was willing to risk bipartisan, bicameral sanctions during the Trump administration to buy Russian weapons. Russia has a lot of feelers out there. It has put a lot of things in play, and it's not only about Russia and Ukraine. And anybody who thinks that we can appease Russia on Ukraine, think about the rhetoric they use in Donbass. We're protecting Russians in Donbass. They use some of the similar rhetoric in the Baltic countries, that there are Russian speakers in the Baltic countries. So we
And
we
they argue, let's go and protect our people. You know, I think I just want to go one further on you. Go to the Middle East, go to Syria, beyond Turkey, of course, and Russia's involvement in Syria and bombing people who were trying to overthrow Assad and keeping his ally Assad in power in Syria. There are a lot.
Libya, where they have their mercenaries, the Wagner Group.
So there's a bigger game out there. To the Kasparov analogy, there is this chessboard. What we can't have is a hot war in the heart of Europe that destabilizes Ukraine, that sends refugees flooding across the border and undermines the economies in that part of the world and impacts us here at home. That's the near term. But boy, oh boy, Russia needs to also understand that we're calling their bluff across the board, that this is not just a one-off and we're going to turn away. This idea, the pivot to China, which is a long time coming, and part of the way this administration is looking, and there's bipartisan support for this, to think about China down the road. They're also saying China better be looking at how we're reacting here and how we have our allies, our democratic partners on our side on this. The thing about, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Andy, but I want to point out, it's not like there's a magic bullet that resolves everything in international affairs. Issues always happen. They always continue. You resolve something, but something new pops up. So these are just going to be ongoing challenges across the board. And if you're Xi, you're in China, you're in Beijing, you're watching this, you're looking at the United States, are you thinking weak, strong, good, bad? Like, just what do you think? Put yourself in Xi's head right now.
Weak. Listen, I want everybody to go. It's still available freely on the internet. Last month's the end of the year Atlantic issue, Ann Applebaum wrote a cover story. It says the bad guys are winning. All right. And it's Putin on there. It's Xi. It's Erdogan. It's Lukashenko and Maduro. All the bad guys are watching this, from Tehran to Beijing. And the fact is, if we can't tell the autocrats, no, this is the order. You may have caught us in a moment of weakness. You may have think the West is not together, but no, this is the order. This is international law. This, and frankly,
right.
While I don't think Ukraine is getting into NATO anytime soon, maybe ever, I don't think it's a matter of the United States to promise Russia to take that out of Ukraine's. That's a sovereign decision by the people of Ukraine. I don't think they qualify for NATO right now, but it's a sovereign decision by the people of Ukraine. And I don't think
for it, it's their right.
Exactly. And I don't think Washington, D.C., this is what we fought the Cold War for. This is what we wanted, a liberal world order. I don't think we should go back to ancient Greece into the Peloponnesian War, where during the Melian dialogue, the Athenians told the Melians, the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. No, that's not what we won 2 world wars and a Cold War over. And
I got to tell you, I so support that point. I don't want to live in a dictatorship. I don't want to live in a country where I can't have freedom of speech and freedom of thought, where I can't have an economic opportunity to do what I choose to do. I don't want to be in a country where my voice doesn't matter and I can't vote. No. And that's what this is about. This is about sovereignty, individual rights, individual choice, freedoms, economic prosperity. And for me, seeing this conflict unfold, all of these issues matter. And we are standing up right now for the idea that a democratic culture is the way forward for the future, that these autocratic regimes are the problem, and they may be winning, quote unquote, in a certain sense, but they're losing also. And they act like this when they know they're losing. And I really want to explore that topic in the future. But this is a critical moment for us to remind ourselves again and again that democratic countries are the places where people want to live. That's where people move to. That's where people establish their societies. And that's where we as a country, by planting a firm flag in the ground right now, on this fight about Russia and Ukraine. We are standing up for democracy and sovereignty and the right of individuals to choose their future. And that's critical at this moment.
We're out of time, Joel. That's it for today's Warning Shot. But tune in Thursday because we have the magnificent Malcolm Nance.
Yeah.
Former U.S. spy and intelligence analyst that's going to be joining us from Ukraine.
Real. This is keeping it real.